I think
Yes.
my opportunity was, as a student, I was allowed to ask a lot of dumb questions, which I still
Okay.
do. And
Yes.
I
Right.
actually have been running a lot of workshops where I say, I will ask you a lot of questions about your business processes. And people go like, oh, I've never thought about that. Well, they've never asked the question.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner and I'm the host of Process Pioneers. I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with the different people, different business process management practitioners that are working on processes, whether internally within an organization or from a consulting perspective as well. But today I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Carmen Jacobs, and Carmen has worked with a number of large organizations, including Sinlay, Fonterra. She also worked as a consulting director over here in Australia with Leonardo for a time there. Quite a broad range of experience there. I'm really excited for today's interview. Carmen, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So what we might do to begin with is that was a very quick and brief introduction to what you've done. But I think what would be good for our audience to listen to and understand is if you can take us back to where you first, found that interest in business processes, and then take us on a journey leading up to today and what you're doing.
It was a little bit murky maybe because after school, and I'm in Germany, so we have the normal school system where you go to school until year 10 and then you kind of specialize towards the work that you actually want to do. And back then there was a school that was offering me two areas of interest to combine, which was business management and IT.
Yep.
Back then I had no idea what either of that was. I had a C64 at home and I learned programming from a book. So that was my little world, and they definitely set me up on the right path, which was awesome. But I learned something which was called system analysis. And that really, really got me because it's the foundation of what is a system, what are the different elements, and how do they all combine? And that absolutely works brilliantly for me. The world I see is very complex, interacting with lots of different elements, and you really need to look at different aspects whenever you look at something. Does it mean a process? Does it mean a system? Does it mean data? Whatever you're dealing with, any organization, we're all in one system and we interact with our parties and have an ecosystem around it. And so one of the opportunities that I got there is to learn processes from a programming point of view. So, and I found that interesting because you basically apply complexity, simplify it into a process logic, and then program it. Just happens to be. And after that, I continued on to study what is called in German, if you were translating it, I think a fortunate translation is system informatics. But it really is, at least where I studied, it's 50% business, 50% IT. And in between is actually, when I studied, was business process management.
Right.
And I think it's actually a perfect combination. So I was lucky enough at uni. I went after the wall came down a few years later, I went to the eastern part of Germany, studied there. And the university where I ended up after 2 years and changed to was in a small town called Rayner. And I just got SAP on board. So my first job literally as a student was to install CDs, to install the SAP system. And then my professor was brand new to the whole topic. So he actually took out the reference model and showed us the process of how to create a sales order.
Right.
And we literally learned SAP for the whole semester along this process. And the beauty of that is that the first transaction was VAO1, so that was SAP 3.1H, long time ago. And the first one is to create a purchase order, which sounds simple, but then you start in to type in, okay, who is it for? Customer. Oh, there's no customer in the system. So let's go master and set up a customer.
Right.
And then, okay, so what does the customer actually want to buy? A product. Oh, we don't have any product in the system. So let's go in the system and set up product master data. So as you can imagine, each of them took us a whole set of hours or weeks to actually set up each of those master data.
Yes.
Pricing. How complex is the pricing? Is it a local customer? Is it an international customer? What kind of discounts do you do? What kind of margins do you do? How do you deal with freight costing? All that sort of things was coming in. What currencies do you have in your system?
Right.
All that sort of thing. And then the next thing is, well, when does a customer want the product? It's like, holy, how do we go into production now? So we had to go through the whole process of production of saying, oh, we need material. Where does the material come from? When can we get the material? When can we produce it? When have you got capacity available? And did the whole planning thing until we finally created one purchase order. And that to me really brought home how SAP works. All the business rules, all the master data, how the process interact with that, and why process and master data have to be aligned for anything to work in any system, in any environment.
Right. Yep.
And then going to an internship, which is a big thing in Germany, is I was able to go into a small production manufacturing company, and it was creating duvet covers, like the duvet fillings, not the covers, but the fillings. Right. So I learned a lot about downs, because that was all the company was doing, and the different types of downs and qualities and all that sort of thing. And I was actually hired to build a little interface between one of their customers, and they got it in via an Excel files of CSV. And they wanted me to upload that into a system. That was what I was hired to do in a month, free of charge, my experience, whatever. Yes. After 3 days, I had it all sorted out, was all tested. I trained everyone. I wrote long, complicated, and a small, simplified version of how to do this, and I really couldn't think of anything else to do for this interface. And so I was sent into the user support, because the IT department was a bit short of people. Right. So at the time, the whole Office thing came out. So the mouse thing and Windows and all that was all new. So there was a lot of user support required. So I set them up with automated sheets, where you have the Excel spreadsheet and you populate your Word documents and you do serial letters and it sends it out. Never heard of any of this. And the lady then was sitting there and going like, so you just reduced my work hours from 8 hours to do the job that I'm supposed to do to 1 hour. What am I going to do the rest of the day? And I said, plenty of work here. So I showed her all the other areas where they were just didn't know where to turn first. Yeah. And the company was really humming really well. But I needed to walk through the production line to actually get to the office from the IT team. So it was all a bit interesting building to get from A to B, because the company was growing so much. And every now and then I walked through and production line was standing still. And I knew the order books were full. And I went like, how come the production line is standing still? They have to chew through to actually fulfill all the orders. Anyway, so I talked to the production manager. And he said, that's a very interesting question. And he said, I can give you some of the answers, but I don't have all the answers. And I said, would you mind if I help you? And out came I with a little process map and started drawing what the process is and the interaction with everything and how it all works together and decision making. And I identified very quickly that the issue was in the warehouse management system and how they put the storage away and the record not being filed properly in the system. So they actually sent out people to go and find raw material or intermediate materials that they needed for that particular piece of manufacturing. And so it was really interesting to see that. And also later on, unfortunately, the company went belly up because they didn't reinvest in the business. The whole area where they were really confined within the limits of a town. They couldn't grow to the extent that they really had to. And because it was company family owned, they didn't really want to reinvest all the money that came out. They rather wanted the money to live off, and cover their expenses. So I think it was a really great lesson learned. So I designed for them a functional concept to actually pick the right warehouse management system. But unfortunately, it never ended up being implemented because they went belly up first.
Right.
So, and then I was originally hired to not being paid for, but the second in charge, who was an equivalent to a COO, as you would call it in English, he was actually just who hired me originally for that interface creation. He said, oh, what did you learn? Kind of, it was more like a small talk and it was kind of half an hour with the boss, And so I started telling him about my experience and what I did. And he said, just hang in there. And he picked up the phone and I thought I'm in the movie, right? So he dialed his secretary and said, cancel all meetings for this afternoon. And I went like, holy shit, what did I do, So he hung up and I showed him all my little diagrams and I didn't know much about it at the time. So my process models were all hand drawn with a little something. So very similar to this one here, actually.
Yes, right.
So on a piece of paper with a pencil around and just showed him all the process models and stuff. And I showed him my own my own very own design of how to show decision making and who the real influencer is in the company and everything. And so after an hour or so, two, whatever it took me to explain all of this and all the shortcomings and all the problems that this company is and ideas how to solve them all, he was leaning back and he went like, it took me 7 years to understand all of that. And you're here, what, a month? And he was awesome. He opened the bottom drawer, took out a checkbook and actually signed me a check for 1,500 Deutschmarks. That to me was like an awful lot of money. I was a student, right?
Yes, right.
And I went like, this is so cool. You can actually make money by going into a company and work out all the problem where they come from and they pay you for it.
Right.
So that was the good idea that I got. Then I do that as a job, and I did. So I ended up doing process-centric SAP implementation and business process management and improvement and all of that sort of stuff in the real world, and I got money for it.
That's amazing.
So that's how it started.
That's great. Thanks so much for sharing that story. I think it's very easy to see your passion and your interest for improving organizations. And I guess one question I had around that was, do you think that you obviously were placed in that organization and you naturally identified the problems and the issues and the pain points. Do you think that is a mindset of the individual, or do you think that's also sometimes company culture and the environment that's cultivated of like a culture of continuous improvement? Do you think it's a bit of both, or talk to us about whether you think, because not everyone, as you were saying, the production line standing still, they obviously weren't looking for how can we improve what we're currently doing. Do you think it's a mindset, or tell us a little bit about that?
I'm sure some people did, and as I said, the manufacturing manager definitely did, because he was in charge for that, obviously. Yeah. But it is a mindset, but I think it is also sometimes a mindset of companies of not enabling employees to do that. So I think in natural, if you do something and it causes you pain, I think you're naturally inclined, and everyone is naturally inclined, to achieve improvements. The question is, do you feel empowered to actually do something about it? Or do you say, that's my job, and if that's what I'm paid for, then that's what I'm paid for. And if I need to fill out a form here manually every day and run around with a piece of paper and and have to write it all down and never ever anything happen, then I'll do that. But I might not get really excited about it. I think my opportunity was, as a student, I was allowed to ask a lot of dumb questions, which I still do. Yes. And I actually have been running a lot of workshops where I say, I will ask you a lot of questions about your business processes, and people go like, oh, I've never thought about that. Well, they've never asked the question. So just asking a question for me is really the key to get somewhere. But you also need to see sometimes a problem from different angles. And that is what not everyone may be trained on or may be exposed to or have the experience with that. Yes, right. But even little kids start with that, particularly when they're 2-3 years old, they go like, why is that? And eventually you're running out of answers, or you have provided enough information for the little one to shut up. And a lot of organizations have stopped these sort of questions, which actually prevented them from doing that. Or they say, no, there's a team there, like a little team of 2-3 people over there, and they do this sort of job. It's not your job, Daniel, so stop it. Right. Don't continue doing anything. And that's obviously then from the company and what we do about it. Mm-hmm.
And I think, it's really important for the employees to feel empowered, because especially the ones on the front line, the ones that are picking up the phone or that are in the warehouse doing the actual work, they're probably the ones in the best position to identify like, well, this actually could improve. This could actually be a whole lot better. And if they don't feel empowered, they're obviously not going to speak up and share their thoughts and what could be better. So.
Exactly. And I think you have to be brave enough to hire someone like that too. Like I was in an organization here in New Zealand, and I've been warned about not to hire a particular business analyst. Right. And I said, why is that? He said, he asked too many questions. I said, I want him. So I did him in an interview, and he came definitely out of saying he's curious, he wants to learn and wants to put it on, and he became the best process analyst that I know here in New Zealand. So awesome.
That's amazing. That's great. Now, for an organization that maybe hasn't adopted a sort of process-centric way of running their organization, or maybe for an organization that has, what is one of the biggest challenges that an organization will face when trying to either adopt BPM or to understand their processes better than they currently do?
Pretty much anything that you do in a company costs money. So you have to have enough understanding about it to say, how does it impact either my cost side or my revenue side? And you have to be able to put kind of a plan together for how can I make this work?
Right.
And this is why it's really important, I think, in a company that's really serious about it, to have this one person as the first starter who has experience how to do that.
Right.
Like one of the organizations I worked in very recently, is there was someone, he was keen and he understood that it should be process centric, the ERP implementation that they're currently doing, but he didn't have the experience with that.
Right.
But he also didn't have any funding or any means to actually hire someone, and didn't know anyone who would have had this experience. So fair enough and good on him. He tried to learn anything through online channels and other things he could, but where do you learn how to run a workshop where you're actually trying to establish a high-level process architecture that works? This is something where you really need experience. So obviously the best way to do that, and I've worked not on both sides, I worked as a management consultant, I've worked internally as an enterprise architect, and often, most of the organizations struggle with how to set up this business architecture. How does it actually work? And a lot of people believe like, oh, you drew all this fancy drawing and you built your ivory towers and whatever. But if you do it right, it actually really engages people and make them think about their company and the end-to-end and how they really add value. And this whole how do we add value is, for me, the most important things. If I'm the business architect or enterprise architect, it's my job to build the architecture, but it's also my job to guide the business, to give me the information that I need to build a useful architecture, but ultimately for them to understand and own it. Because this ownership cannot sit with an enterprise architect, or worse, with an external consultant. And then they say, oh, well, she put this together and, she's out the door. She actually works for someone like Leonardo or something like that. But it's not my responsibility.
Yes.
So for me, for an organization, what's really important is you have to have this one person, ideally internal, who is passionate about and has some experience. And I also find that that's a big issue in some countries more than others. So I lived and worked in Germany, obviously, for the beginning of my career, and they were way ahead from Australia when I got there about 18 years ago or so. There wasn't much there, and it changed a lot when QUT picked up as a university and Michael Roseman came on board as a professor, and he started to actually educate people about BPM.
Right.
And so now classic managers who were studying business management learned about at least the basics of what business process management is and what a process is and what process improvement is and how it works. But then more and more people came along too and doing those courses, and I did a few lectures there as well, which gives a bit of practical background, and you hear people speak about it. And since then, the whole infrastructure has taken up big time, and a lot of organizations doing it. And I see a lot of companies in Brisbane who have hired people, obviously from university, and have been using that, but also used people like Michael Roseman and some of his PhD students to actually kickstart it as a process. And obviously we in Leonardo, when I was there and built it all up and built this reputation, we did that a lot. So our perception was, we are not going in and do it for you. We are doing it with you. We're partnering with you. And I think it's also important when you do engage a management consulting company that they have this attitude as in, I'm not doing that for you and then you give me money for it and I'm leaving, but we actually build you up. We build your knowledge base. We not just deliver artifacts that you tick off and pay for, but you actually gain the knowledge. And not just you as the small team of business process management teams, center of excellence, or whatever you might call it, are doing it, but also to involve it. And another thing that I see is a lot of organizations do it in certain areas, like manufacturing naturally lends itself to it. If I'm in supply chain, as the name says, it's a chain of activities and integration. So naturally, the thinking is there, if I get some stuff in through logistics, I deal with an external party. So I need to tell them what kind of trucks I need. When do they need to come in? For that to be able to do, I need to do some planning. So I need to know what activities I do here on the side when the truck arrives, and what my utilization is of the resources. And then where in the warehouse am I going to put it? And then at what stage is it actually released that it can go into manufacturing or it can go into sales, depends what kind of business you're in. And how is it available, and how can I forecast the availability then onwards to my customer through the whole planning process you do in between, and either manufacturing or sales and packaging and whatever to get it out. But again, a lot of these organizations think about minor process improvements because continuous improvement has taken off big time. But a lot of people forget that sometimes continuous improvement and minor changes is not cutting it. If I'm already there and I keep losing customers, or I have a backlog on all these trucks coming in and everything is going everywhere and haywire and it's just not working, then I may need to look at my process fundamentally, and then there are different approaches to that. And again, this is in the beginning where it's helpful to have someone to give you a hand with this. It is cheaper and easier to get the return on investment if you have such someone permanently in your job, because it's just lower expenditure altogether. And the other thing is this person can actually build internal relationships. And then you can make sure that there's one manager where you help to improve business is now talking to the other manager who has a similar problem and could be helped with those processes too. So it is sometimes easier if you do internal relationships, talking about the culture you mentioned before. Sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes it's an internal. You be treated as you have no idea anyway, and the only people who have ideas are those management consultants who bring in the big guys and they know it all, So that's definitely a cultural thing of how the management perceives it. But I think in a lot of teams, people are underestimated their own knowledge. I am a firm believer that the knowledge is already in the organization. It is in people's heads. If you always run into the same problem, you have at least some ideas of how they can be fixed. You may not be empowered to actually fix them. And then it's just a matter of finding those teams and get them fixed. But again, there's a little pitfall in this, and this is where the experience comes in. We have done this as one of the companies that I worked for, and they came in and they ran a program for 3 years, which I think is too long for this type of program, where they say, you go and find any sort of savings and we implement it, and we find a way to implement it. And they had the staging in it and had the team to vet it. And at the end, if it was successful, you actually got personally being rewarded for it. $400 or something if your idea was big enough, or $100. So you get actually money in your back pocket for even making these suggestions. And so that's a great idea. But the problem is that people then started to do process optimization in their little business areas, what we call functional silos, and actually pushed all the problems down the chain. So in the beginning in my team, if I let go through some of the issues early and I don't address them, where I have 2 people who can address them, the problem become bigger and bigger, particularly for my customer. And now I need 6 people to fix it. But what happened is they suggested these proposal on the first step of the process of saying, oh, you can save 1 resource here, 1 FTE a year, yay, $100,000 saved. But actually now the company spends $500,000 more because we actually need 5 people downstream to actually fix what you just been pushing down the drain. And that's why I'm saying it is great to initiate those programs, but you have to have a team internally who can actually see what happens. Are your suggestions actually working, and not just seeing your business area that you're responsible for?
And when you were talking about, that, like, putting together that proposal or plan, and just going back to what you're saying earlier, and finding that person that can really own it internally, does that have to be senior leadership? Because I know obviously the executive team, they're the ones that are, I guess, the ultimate decision makers, or can you have someone that is an influencer that can influence the decision and get the ball rolling that way?
It can be anywhere on the level. It really can be. And it really depends of who have you got, who has an idea to buy into it. And usually the people who buy into it is because they have a big problem.
Yes.
So I've seen it that it was started in what was called a global business service or a shared service team, where they say, me as a shared service, all the activities that we do are pretty much at the end of my processes. Say I'm in accounts payable. Yeah. And in theory, I should by now, and every large consulting company will tell you that, have a large percentage of automation of all my payments.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But to be able to do that, and I can now easily go and say, you global services, you shared services, you should achieve 98%. Why do you only achieve 70%?
Right.
And if you look at the process and why they can't actually automate the payment is often because the payments are late, the information is not there, there's no reference to a purchase order, no purchase order exists, so they can't know what to check against. The invoice hasn't been approved on time. There's actually issues. It wasn't delivered in full or 2 terms or whatever, or this information was never passed on to accounts payable. So there's lots of reasons why they can't do it. So if this team is now trying to do the process improvement, there's only so much they can do, because they only can identify what these issues is why we can't pay it, but they can't solve them, not by themselves. What you need for that is collaboration, right? So now you're actually, to be successful, if that's your team, if you're in a global business service, shared service department where you're at the end of the process, accounts receivable, accounts payable, for example, classic example, you need to go upstream. You need to lobby the people who do the purchasing. You need to lobby the people who do the sales, because in the sales process or in the procurement process, you have to make sure that the right information is being maintained and kept and is correct, but also that it's done in a timely fashion. So when you now ask, where should such a team sit? Yes, it can sit in the shared services. If that shared service manager or BPM manager is allowed to lobby the other teams. And this is where often the crux is. Often if it's done within one functional team, it is often a guidance of the senior manager of that functional team to say, do not talk to my peers. And if you do that, you actually cut yourself short of success. You will never be successful, because business process management lives of collaboration.
Yes.
That means we need to agree that we want to solve an overarching end-to-end problem. And then we need to walk through of what do we need from each of the party involved in to be successful in what we try to achieve, rather than just saying, well, I'm good at what I'm doing. It's not my problem. You go and sort it out, right? So that attitude doesn't work.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter where they sit. I see them a lot sitting in IT, because it's kind of the neutral party who's not really involved in the value chain processes. But also because of that, it may fail, because they're seen like, oh, you're just a techie guys. You have no idea about it. Like I was working as an enterprise architect in an IT department, and the senior business manager was actually talking to me, and she said to me after half an hour, she pushed out all the meetings for a while. And after half an hour, finally, that I had the meeting with her one-on-one, she said, you know, you're the first person who really speaks my language. You're not just talking IT to me. So depends where you are in the organization. There might be a certain stigma related to that job where people have a preperception that, for example, if you come from an IT department and your BPM team is in IT, you only want to talk about IT, and you use all these words that I don't understand and they're meaningless to me. And when I talk about as a business person, as return on investment and savings and that sort of thing, you wave it off and you talk about your capabilities and functionalities and all that sort of things. So it is where that melting point's coming, yeah? But to me, everything I do, if I'm in the IT department, business pays for me, right?
Right.
Because if business wouldn't work properly and their processes don't work properly and their customers are not happy and their suppliers are not happy to work with us, and the easier they are working with us and the easier we make their life, the lower the cost will be, right?
Yes,
if you're really hard to work with and you're my customer, I make your prices higher, right? Because you cause me so much issue that I have to have a whole team sitting there solving all the problems that I have with you.
Yes.
So I won't give you the lowest price, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why sometimes it's interesting too if the different departments would just simply talk to each other.
Yes.
If accounts payable would talk to accounts receivable and saying, what are your common problems? What do you deal with?
Yeah.
And some manager once said to me, why would you do that in our own company? I said, they can learn from each other. They can learn how to make your customer happy.
Yes.
Because they're just the opposites of what they see on the other side of the customer. Right? So if you understand it, you might be able to provide them with easier solutions and easier service and understand what kind of information they need and why. If you can't talk to your customer or your supplier.
Yes.
It's in some cases, again, is in people's heads. As in, we are in our little box and we are in our little logo world, and we know there's world outside, but you as the person improving the process are not allowed to talk to any of these.
Right.
So all you need to do is hopefully the people who deal with them every day can really tell us what they think. But again,
Yes.
they're quite low level of detail.
Right.
So it's actually much better if you can talk, say, to account managers or to business development managers. We did that once in a company that I worked for here in New Zealand, where we did the end-to-end. We onboarded new farmers. Yeah, it's a very important process. This is where the majority of money is spent. They're the prime suppliers to this company.
Right.
And if they have a bad experience being onboarded, then guess what? You're off on a bad footing on a relationship that should last for 5 or 10 years.
Yeah.
And so what we did there is we just pulled all the different teams in. But it was at the end really the business development manager who could really tell us of, here is the experience of this new person. Here is what we tell them. Here's all the things we promise them. And then they sign and they cannot get out of the contract anymore. And all of that experience, yes, we get all the benefits, but in 3 months, in 6 months or 9 months time, well, we actually did all our calculation already to make all the savings that you promise us we can do because of your market power. We can realize in the beginning of it when we needed it, right?
Yes.
And it didn't happen. And so they signed the contract. They got into more and more debt than they planned to, because none of these promises were actually fulfilled, but it was the promises that made them sign the contract in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And it was resolved because everyone had just their own perception of saying, oh, legally we can't do this, and there's a reason for why we can't do that, and this store there never would do that. And so we talked to them and they said, it's not a problem. We just have to have some rules around it, write some new policies, and all of a sudden the whole process became much better.
Yes,
we did 4 sessions and we had 100 improvements around.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And now the new customer experience, our onboarding experience is very different.
Yes. Now, for someone listening to you talk about when you're talking about collaboration and how important that is, and maybe they're from an organization where that isn't fostered, that collaboration and talking interdepartment and things like that. Do you have any advice as to how do you foster that? How do you help encourage that? How do you, I guess part of that is, pitching the value in the process work or process improvement, and not just to the executive team, because the executive team might have buy-in and they might understand the value, but the other, the frontline employees or the account payable manager or whoever you're talking to, you need to, I guess, understand, how do you pitch it to them? How do you pitch it in a way that they can see it like, oh yeah, this is a good thing and I need to give you my time. So how do you go about doing that?
I think there are 2 aspects to that. The first one is storytelling. So we are social creatures. We want to know, we are not with problems or with whatever hits us and whatever we're exposed to. So I think telling stories of other organizations that do that, or sharing the experience, as I said, from one department with another, it's not just on management level, but really also to bring in the people who have been impacted by that. Those people that are actually sitting back and say, that won't work anyway. Yeah. How do you correct them? It's through storytelling and saying, okay, so what is your problem and what are you actually doing and what have you tried and why did that fail? So it's also, one thing is to talk to them, but the other thing is to engage with them and saying, what if I could take that pain that you experience every day, if I could make that go away? What then?
Right.
If you provide benefits to the frontline staff who are actually executing it, what we call the lowest level in the process architecture, everything is just theory for us to manage something. But what really it happens is on the bottom, in the individual tasks that you're doing and the people. If you can't show these people what the benefits are, and if there's no benefits for them whatsoever, the chances that you can implement any change is pretty low.
Right.
So in some cases, unfortunately, we do have that, because they have to maintain more information. They have to follow more business rules. They have to be more stringent with certain criteria and decision making. We may need to take away their freedom and flexibility in some decision making. So we give them more restricted rules. And then it's very important to explain the why.
Right.
Yeah. Because if someone understands why you just have to do that, yeah, sorry, and it will be harder for you, but you just have to do that, then you should show them what the impact is. So why do we need to do that? In some cases, you have to tell them, well, this is a new law. Here's why the law came in. Here's what it's trying to do. Here's what will happen if you don't follow the law. And guess what, Daniel, you are the first line defense for us. If you get it right, we will be good and we can continue doing what we're doing. If we fail and we get done for it because we're actually violating against, say, Privacy Act or something like that, we're out of business. You will lose your job. So if you can make it personal and if you can actually explain to the roles what it will mean to them, people usually come on board.
Yes. Yep.
But if you do that, don't try to sit in your table in isolation and come up with a solution and then come in and say, oh, by the way, from next week onwards, you have to do this, right? But try to engage with them early. As I said, say, what are your common problems? How do you think we should solve that? That doesn't mean that they have the final solution, but they may have just the key to your problem.
Yeah.
So it's not about so much to come up with all these great ideas. It's more to say, can these ideas work? And in some cases, really build the trust with the people that they will tell you.
Yeah.
And I guess that was my advantage when I was a student. I was just a dumb student. I had no idea. And I literally went in and I said, well, I don't know how any of this works. I'm just a student.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So I can just go in and, tell me how that works. Or in this case, in some cases, I go like, well, another organization, I've seen this doing that way. So why do you do it this way? I just try to understand, what's the benefit of doing that? And then they go, actually, there's no benefit. What you're saying is much better. And you already kind of got them over, or they might have a really good reason behind it. So always start with a question. Don't go in and tell them and saying, this is what you should be doing,
Yeah.
So you're not in a parent-child relationship. You're in collaboration where both are equal parties and they talk to each other.
Yeah. And I think when you engage those employees and you do ask those questions, you are in a way empowering them to start thinking about, well, where is the problem and what is the pain point? And then when you continue that conversation and find out, well, how do you think we can resolve this? Or what do you think that there is a better way? And if you think there's a better way, what are the different better ways that you're thinking of? I think that you might have a solution that is at 100%, but if that solution or that better process isn't adopted, then it's worthless. If you engage Barry or Bob or Fiona, if you engage them, they identify the pain points of problems and they come up with like a solution that might be 75% efficient. Well, 75% efficient that actually gets done and the improvement is realized is much better than 100% solution that isn't actually activated at all. So.
That's right. And I think there are two aspects to that. So the one thing is that a lot of organizations do it right, that they engage in the first phase, as in, what is your problem? What do you think we could do about it?
Right.
But then often project teams drop away, go into their little room and do all the magic and work out all what the end-to-end solution might be. Yeah. And then they forgot to check it, to actually go back to the people and say, remember 3 weeks ago, a month ago, 3 months ago, we talked about this. Do you think if we were to implement something like this, do you think this would work? Where do you think would be the problem? And ideally, you do that before you spend all the money on implementing all the systems that will actually do this. Because now you do two things. You keep the engagement open. You say, we didn't just have a chat for waste of time, but we actually had a chat and we took your ideas. And also, and this is also important to say, you suggested back then to do this and this. Here's why we think it's not a good idea. Or here's why I think it's not a good idea. And then you may learn something else about the problem. I might have forgotten an aspect. Yeah.
Right.
Or the guy said, actually, I never thought about it. I said, okay, so what we thought might work, and I would like to have your feedback on this, is we were thinking about if we could do such and such and such. Do you think that could help? Where do you think the problem is? Again, I preempt before I build anything to prevent any system problems that it will have into something that now costs $50,000 to change.
Yes, right.
And I try to do that when I do the concept. Oftentimes what I see is people do the current state and they do an engagement in the beginning well, but they don't do the intermediate steps.
Yes.
But if I do that, I can learn about that before I even build something. And this is also where prototyping comes in. Often people need to see it. I can do a screenshot. I can do mock-ups. There's so many software programs that you can use these days. It looks like you already built it. Well, you haven't, really.
Yes.
Even in PowerPoint slides, I can build that. Yeah.
Yes.
I can say, okay, here are 3 slides, and I press this button. And guess what? It's just a PowerPoint that has a dot on it, and in full screen mode, if you click on it, just opens the next slides. That's all. It's not systems, nothing behind it, right?
Yeah.
But it gives the person the feeling of saying, well, now you could add here. And then they come up with more things because they see it. Not everyone is visual and have great imagination. So they need something more specific. And now we live in an age where we have all this stuff. You can mock up stuff. Everyone is savory about their little phones and their little apps. You know, you can relate it to something that people are familiar with. Imagine what you could do if you have this information there. Is it a problem when you go out? And they may say, hey, if I have no network connectivity, which I may have out on the farm, then what do I do? Yeah.
Yes, right.
Or I talk to people, my majority of my customers are in the third world. Yeah. They don't have a landline. They don't have stable internet connection. Maybe it's easier if I just send them an SMS rather than an email.
Right.
Yeah, because the service, the technology is a lot simpler and more reliable.
Yes.
So it's that sort of stuff that I need to consider when I build. And the best way of doing that is check with the people, and not just your internal people, but check with your ecosystem.
Right.
There's no harm to go to your customer and ask them. You just should engage the account manager, right?
Yes.
So,
yes. Yeah.
Because that guy should be or that woman needs to be across of what you're talking with the customer, not that you raise wrong expectations.
No, that's good. And right at the beginning of our conversation, when you were, talking about how you got started in process, you mentioned a time there where you helped improve. I think it was a lady's job where it normally would take her, or a task that she was doing, it would normally take her, I think it was 8 hours, and you reduced it down to 1 or something like that. Mm-hmm. Do you have any examples of, I guess now that you're at the other end of your career from, just starting out, and I'm assuming that you've got plenty of examples along the way where you've taken a process, you've made, whether it's minor tweaks or whether it's radical innovation, and you have seen significant value delivered to the organization, whether that's in cost savings, time savings, or revenue generation. Do you have any examples that come to mind that you can, I guess, share with the audience? Like, this is possible. This is an example of where an organization has received huge value from improving their business process.
You can pretty much pick any technology these days that will deliver stories like that. So I've seen it preventative, where we actually talked through some of the stuff and then we were shut down by the account managers and saying, you just can't do that. The customer will not jump on this. This is not the information the customer needs. I've seen the opposite, where they built a portal and the portal was information only for the customer. But then you go but if the customer sees all the information, wouldn't he want, particularly in these days and age, to go and place the order for the product and all the detail that you just provided? And they said, oh yeah, that comes in the next phase. But then what are you doing? You're actually putting the carrot out there for the customer and say, I've got this portal, you can do self-service, but only for information. So for everything else, you still have to use the old way of sending me an email or fax, or, do it via EDI, but it's still not through the portal, and it's still not in the context in which I have actually seen information.
Yes, right.
So that's one thing or people have forgotten what the process is. They literally, and I see that unfortunately, a lot of ERP implementation, the ERP implementation goes in and say, we've got a brand new system. It costs $20 million to implement. Tell me your current process. And you go what's wrong with this idea? So you're telling me a current process in a system that clearly doesn't work and doesn't do exactly what I want to do, because there's a reason why we want to replace it, right?
Right.
So then it's a matter of saying, if you tell me the current process, I'm still stuck with a process in 12 months' time when I go live, which is as bad as it is today.
Right.
So where does the return on investment now come from? Nothing has changed. Nothing has improved. But the same process now costs $20 million more.
Yes, right.
And it's still a bad process.
Yes.
So this is why this whole process-centric in approach and ERP implementation, mainly SAP I've done, but I've done a few Bahn and Oracle ones as well, is really important to get that right. So it is not the one little things that you change. It's about the 150 things that you change along the value chain, and where the handover points are correct and where the data transition is correct, but also where you say you understand what the impact is.
Yes.
So for example, we had one company, they developed a brand new product, and it was obviously addressing multi-million-dollar issue that they had.
Right.
They developed this new product in about 2 years. They changed some of the attributes, made it more appealing, and took only a subset of information, which helped them to improve the process and achieve great outcomes. They were classic to work in an isolation. So what did they do? They looked at the products, they looked at the procurement part of it, they looked at the recipe of that, they looked at how to manufacture it. All great. They forget that this product needed to be shipped to the customer too.
Right.
It needed to be stored in a warehouse. They changed it from what is called a cold storage product to an ambient product.
Right.
It's great. And for 2 years, they worked on it. But they told the logistic team and the warehousing team only 2 weeks before go live.
Okay.
So now you change 30% of the large scale of your products from a cold storage product into an ambient product to bring down the cost. So how do you expect now your warehouse team to change their warehouse infrastructure within 2 weeks to bring it from a cold storage to an ambient storage to actually save the cost that you predicted it would have?
Right.
Now I have trucks on the road. They all scheduled in the cold trucks and the cold transport and the ambient goods. All of a sudden, now I'm supposed to schedule all my new products on the ambient trucks. But my fleet is built for all this cold transport.
Right.
And all the schedules are done for the cold transport. So now what happened? My schedule for the ambient transport blows out and I don't have enough trucks.
Yes.
So what happened to my cost? It just went through the roof. Right? So where's the saving in that? The saving in that would have been if they looked at the whole end-to-end value chain and saying, if I develop a new product and I change all these properties of the product, what's the impact along the whole value chain?
Mm-hmm.
Not just the procurement, not just the recipe and how I need to manufacture it, but also how does it get to my customer? That's the end part that was missing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that can be $1 million. And the other thing too is to have policies in place. Yeah. So return policies is a classic one. When do you accept goods to be returned? How do you deal with return goods? How much does it cost you to actually say, you know, Daniel, you just keep the product. I know it's pretty crap, it has a short shelf life anyway. So within a week, it's off. If you try to send it back to me, it takes 3 days. Then I have a good that I actually receive and it's only good for 2 days. I can't sell this anymore.
Yes.
You may as well keep it. And I give you money back. Or I send you another product and the question is what's cheaper? Yeah. And I need to look at it again from the whole process, not just saying, is it cheaper for me because I have 150% margin on that to actually give you the new product and I save the 150% margin as my cost? It's not, because now I need to get this one product to you in a reasonable short period of time.
Yes.
Is that actually feasible for me to do?
Right.
But often, if you think through all of this along the process, you get a beautiful policy that actually works.
Yes.
And this is one of the things I've done once, where I actually went through the different teams and logistics and the warehouse and everything. And we did a return policy, when you can return, when you can't return. And often, for example, here in New Zealand, but also in Australia, you're an island. That means a lot of your business happens overseas. Yeah. For Australia and New Zealand, the Asian market is a big customer in a big market. But it still takes a few weeks for a ship to get there, to get the product through and to go to customs and all those sort of clearances. But then if you wanted to do that, if you actually replace the product, you need to have an onshore warehouse. And that's now an extra costing too.
Yes.
So is it cheaper for me to improve the process and actually get the customer happy the first time around? Yeah. And can I improve that process rather than try to work out how do I do returns in the most cost-effective way and to keep the customer most happy? Well, you shouldn't even have returns.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
That's great.
And I've also seen RBA, for example, reverse business tools being used and process automation tools being used to actually automate exception processes like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit like, I always use it as a typical company, because I think the majority of them got it really well nailed down now, is the airlines. Yeah. If I take Qantas or Air New Zealand or any other airline, if I want to book my ticket, I go online and do it all. I check in all online these days, no queuing, no nothing. And I just get on board and I arrive at the airport. What I expect is my suitcase is there when I arrive with me at the same location, right?
Yes.
So I'm really happy if it actually comes out on the little conveyor belt by the time I make it from the gate to the conveyor belt.
Right.
Yeah. Awesome experience. I've lost my luggage. I've been traveling a lot, to be fair. I only lost my luggage 3 times. And it's really within a long period of time. But every time there was an improvement. The first time I flew from Germany to Poland. It took them 5 days to get the luggage from Germany to that airport in Poland where I was. 5 days. And then they said, your luggage is here, you can pick it up now.
Okay.
So that was my first experience. And I was literally 5 days on a business meeting, and I had to run trainings from morning to evening, and the shops closed half an hour after I finished training. There was no way for me to get to the shop. So I literally had to wash out all my gear and everything and go to a fuel station to get toothbrush and toothpaste and stuff, like the basics, to get through. Just to then pick up my suitcase with all my nice and clean clothes in it, literally on the way home. So I was wearing the same clothes every day. I had to hand wash it because the hotel was in renovation and it didn't have a washing machine, and get through it, right? So that was pretty much the worst experience. Next time I lost the luggage, they delivered it 1 day later and delivered it to my hotel.
Right.
Awesome. So I was happy about it. But for 24 hours, I didn't have any clothes either.
Yeah.
Next time it happened, I got the suitcase within 4 days. It was within 4 hours. It was delivered to my hotel at reception. I got a message and saying, your suitcase has been delivered to the hotel. Much better.
Yes.
So would I invest a lot of money as an airline into that lost luggage process? Or would I be better off investing the same amount of money to improve the process to prevent lost luggage processes?
Right.
So when we talk about investments and return on investments, that's something you need to consider. Mm-hmm. It is great if I can automate all these bad processes. Things don't match and I have a higher level of tolerance in there. It's great to automate this process. But shouldn't I be actually putting the money in of improving the process that I shouldn't have those exceptions?
Right. That's great. And talking about technology, because, we've been talking about automation here, and I over the last 10, 15, 20 years, technology really has is evolving quite rapidly. And I think we talked about it earlier, where some organizations will notice what another organization is doing, but they won't understand the context. They won't understand the company culture. They won't understand like everything else they have in place for that technology to achieve the return on investment that they're looking for. But they'll just adopt that technology regardless, being like, well, it's working for you. Let's chuck it in here. It's going to work for us anyways. So talking about, everything that's, we've got robotic process automation, we've got process mining, we've got all these new technologies that are being talked about a lot these days. But what do you see as the future of business process management going ahead 2, 3, 5, 10 years? And obviously every organization is at a different level of maturity and will require different things at different points. But what does the future look like for you?
Well, I can just see from different countries. So for example, in Germany, where I'm from, the whole business process management is at a much, much higher level of maturity. So I just received 2 years ago a job offer where someone was hunting me and said, this is a job, would you be interested in doing that? And one part of that stands, like in the ad, it says, one part of your role's responsibility is you're a process owner and here are all the things you're responsible for along the process. So the whole idea of you have a management position, and with that automatically you're responsible for this part of the process and also to contribute to the end-to-end and value of it and everything like that. If I look at job ads here in Australia or in New Zealand, there's hardly any mention of that. And it's a special person, and it needs to have this whole discussion of should and shouldn't we have that, and can we have it in all areas or just in some areas? as long as this sort of discussion is still there, the maturity is pretty low in the overall market. And this is also what I said before, that has a lot to do with universities and education in general, because you need to build this vast basis. It's not just a few people select in the organization need to be trained like that, but you have to have this basic level. One of the key issues that I have is to find really well-educated process analysts. I came to Auckland and I thought Auckland definitely is a spot. There are a majority of all people even working here, and surely all the high skills people would first of all come to Auckland. But we were really, really struggling to actually find experienced process analysts. Most of them are self-taught, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the lack of maturity was just very clear. If I started to ask them about BPMN, what does it mean? They weren't quite clear of, well, what is it? And I just drew some basic drawings and they couldn't even identify, didn't know the notation. But according to their CV, they are BPM 2.0 experts, right? So there's a long way to go with that. And so that actually needs to be the foundation to actually build on. And also when I see all these new technologies, you really have to understand what kind of level of maturity from a BPM point of view do you need within the organization to really make that work.
Right.
As I said, with RBA is a classic example. I worked in an organization where RBA was brought in by an external consulting company and said, you should be doing it because everyone in your size is doing that, and everyone in your industry is doing that, and everyone else is doing that, so you should be doing it too. So they went out and tried to find use cases. And they find all those issues and they're all the exception where it's a typical scenario to actually do RPA and automate things. But they automated a lot of really bad processes. Right. So the investment would have been actually better to improve the process and then see the leftover cases. Does that still justify a process improvement like an automation? And people think, I automate, I set and forget. But that's not how it works. Any minor change within the system actually means any change of information. Your process, your bot will break. It will no longer work. So now you have maintenance to do. Yeah. Process mining, the same thing. It's beautiful. The vendor goes in and says, all we do, you already have an ERP system. We stuck it on and it spits out all these processes. Fantastic. So it comes back and says, you have got so many instances where you don't have a purchase order to an invoice and the three-way matching is not working because of that, or you don't have a confirmation or something like that. But then is it normal? If you got an invoice today from your energy company and you don't have a purchase order for that, is that normal? Right. Well, I don't know about you, but I don't know any company. Well, I know a few companies, they can forecast their consume of power very accurately. Yeah, but
yes,
I don't know anyone here in this area, and I certainly, even in my private life, can't forecast how much electricity I will use, roughly ballpark, but not close into it. So for those things, you will never have a purchase order because you don't know the exact consumption. Is it a bad thing? No. It is an exception process that you make, and you make it a variance because for some of these, you have a rule that it's fine. If your house is on fire, you don't go like, oh, sorry, we don't have a contract with the fire brigade in place. Let me just raise a purchase order before we actually call them because, you know, well, that ain't going to happen because your company burns down before you can even get around to do it. But then there are other cases, if you do plant maintenance and you know 3 months in advance what you need, well, you should really have a raised purchase order. Then the question is, do you automate that then, convert it automatically to a purchase order in a certain timeline in line with when the material can actually be delivered and I know the delivery time. So you're working backwards and you don't spend your money before you actually need it. And you may need to change the part last minute and then change the order and all this sort of things happen. But on the other hand, that's that process and all the different variances. People often are not aware of what variances they really need, why, at what point in time. And a lot of people don't know how many variances of these end-to-end processes like procure to pay or source to pay or order to cash they actually have and why they have all the variances. In some cases, companies tell me, well, this is our unique selling point. I can change on a drop of the head. Yes, you can. But there's cost associated with that too. And they have no idea how much each of these variances actually cost them. And which one they should chase. And now all of a sudden with COVID and other reasons, they find themselves in the bredouille because they need to drop the cost because they don't have the revenue that they usually have. And with less revenue, they have less profit and the profit margin is dropping. And now they still have to survive because they have to pay back their investment. How do they do that? If you don't know what your processes are and the financials are and how to optimize them, none of these tools and solutions will really help you until you build sufficient understanding. Yes, they can help you with reducing the time for the documentation. They can help you by identify that you have those things. So you can go and ask the question, why? Oh, do we have this and do this? Yeah, do we really need it? So it gives you a lot of opportunity to do improvement. But I haven't seen yet the technology that does it all for you.
Yes. And now for someone listening right now, and there's going to be a range of different people listening from different levels within an organization. And they've been listening to our conversation and enjoying learning about business processes and what it can do for an organization and, the many different facets of it. But what now, or where would you encourage them to go, or to research, or to talk to? They want to learn more about business process management. And the internet, there's a lot out there, and sometimes it's a bit overwhelming to know, like, well, what is the right information, or what is the right information for our situation? So if someone was listening right now, and where would you, and what direction would you point them in?
Well, the first thing is you can Google, and that's always a good start for you. You just have to differentiate two things of what definition of BPM do we have? And so with all the new technology coming up, if you Google BPM today, you will find two aspects. One is anything to do with process automation of some degree or another, fully automated, computer-aided, business intelligence, process mining, all these sort of things. But that's all the technology enablement side of it. And then there is a business process management as a management discipline. And there's a reason why it's a capital M at the end and not the small m for modeling, but the capital M for the management, because it needs to be aligned with what you do as a management approach in your company.
Right.
So I think there are two different levels. First is if we look at from a process analyst, business analyst, that sort of level, process execution, project management type of thing, where the majority of organizations starts with, it's definitely a good idea just to learn some basics about how does process architecture work. You don't have to have a process architecture. You don't have to do it for the whole organization. You can just do it for one process. Yeah. Start there, learn how to do it. The easiest way to start with that is with notations. There are lots of standard notations out there. BPM is one of them. EPC is another one. There's process flow, value streams. There's lots of different things like that. Try it. Try it out with some process you are most familiar with. And if you really don't know anyone, you're a student, well, then say, how do you prepare for an exam? How do you do your shopping? How do you do your budget planning at home? You always do process if you're aware of it or not. Yeah.
Yes.
How did you book your flight? How did you get from A to B last week on your holidays? Yeah. That sort of things. That's all a process. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's the first thing. Processes are all around us. That's not a problem. And notation is a good thing, but there's a lot of training. So IIBA, for example, there's a lot of information, and you can download their books. You can become a member, and there's lots of trainings that they offer around the place. Universities, definitely a great point to start with. Even on things like online universities, they do a lot of courses. They are like $10-15, and you do like a week course, like 100 hours of it, and it's really good foundational business. That's one thing. If you're an organization, it is better if your whole group learns the same. So go and find a good management company. So PP Trends in America is obviously a good source for information generally around the business process management aspects for that. There is also other things that are usually related to some modeling tools. They have got communities around that where you can find a lot of information, practical stuff, how to do process modeling. Universities, as I said, does it. QUT, for example, in Brisbane, it's a good example. If you want to train your team, they can do it. Leonardo Consulting, obviously, in Australia, is definitely do that too. I think they do some trainings here in New Zealand as well. I'm happy to provide some trainings if you're interested. So that's all not a problem to find that. Where there is more problem to find that is the management of that. Yeah, and so the management aspect of that is really, how do you align the strategy of your company with your process management, and what can the benefits for that do? And the problem there is also you can't get usually senior management to say, go 1 week in a room and lock yourself up and just do the 1 week training. Yeah. So it's often better, because you have a small group, to do one-on-ones and then make it specific for that person. but use the same logic that you do for all your projects that you're going to deliver, because otherwise you set expectations on a senior management level that your projects will not fulfill. If you want to do Six Sigma down here, or you want to do lean down here, make sure that your manager is educated around the lean, not the operational doing, but to say, what's the strategy? How does it link to strategy? If I decide today that I want to go out in a new market and I build this market, or I want to grow 30% year on year, what does strategic BPM give me? It gives me, if I have a proper architecture in place, a process architecture from someone built with experience, I can actually go through and say, where are the impacts? What does your 30% grow mean? What does it mean to procurement? What does it mean to your manufacturing or your service delivery team? What does it mean to your business development team? What does it even mean to your funnel of how many opportunities you need to have to come in? How do you actually go on the market? Then the ecosystem. Who is your partner? Does your current partner infrastructure does it? Or do you need to expand it? And do you need to look at new opportunities and new partners in new markets and how you develop that? All of that to me is all strategic BPM. And that's a much smaller group of people who can do that. And the same, I've worked as an enterprise architect, obviously, and to come up with cloud strategy. Okay, cloud strategy, what's the sizing? How do you go about it? Okay, you tell me your business strategy. You tell me what kind of traffic am I going to see to your customers, to your vendors, to all the other business partners. So there might be authorities like Department of Primary Industries here is a big one for certain industries, or a regulatory body in banking where I have regular updates and large data to, or my taxation office, that I need to provide information from regularly and interact with. These are all infrastructure and information that I need, and there's different level of security around this required as well. In some cases, I may not provide information directly. Maybe I go through a tax agent who then submits the data in my name to IRD, for example, or ATO. So these are all the infrastructure that I need to understand. And then if I want to have a grow, or if I want to shrink all my costs across the company, or if I want to bring out expenditure that I have and bring them down in certain areas, is it really located only to the one area? Or as I said, with a new product development, is it really just the manufacturing guys, or do the sales team need to know earlier, and the infrastructure and the guy who are in the supply chain? When do I need to inform them? What kind of lead time do they need to have? Right. So for this whole collaboration to work also on strategic level is to say, what kind of change can I do and what kind of timeframes? And if these timeframes are not short enough, then maybe you should start implementing those changes now, because guess what? Your timeframes will be this short, and you will have to be able to deliver in that timeframe.
Yes. Yeah.
And then you should look at what technologies can I use to achieve that. That's usually the better way to do it, because then you also know the kind of dollar value, the kind of reduction, and with that you usually can identify a budget easier. If you grow your market and you forecast $10 million in growth, then you might get $1 million to actually implement a solution that will help you to achieve that. But if you aim to build something and saving of $50,000 and your solution cost $100,000, it may not work.
Yes. Yeah. That's amazing. Well, Carmen, we've tried to squeeze in as much as we can into, we've been able to stretch the interview about to just over an hour, and but really it's only scraping the surface. But I think, I was really excited for our interview today because I'd actually had, and I was meant to say this at the beginning, but I had recommendations from all different people that I'd interviewed and also people that I hadn't interviewed yet that recommended get in touch with Carmen, sit down with Carmen, talk to Carmen about her experience and her career, because she's got a lot of value to bring, a lot of value to share. And I know that the audience that will be listening to this is going to glean a lot. And I'm sure that you're going to be getting messages and connection requests after people see this, because they'll want to understand more and ask you questions, why, and find more, learn more about process management from you. So I just want to thank you for sitting down with me today. And, we could go on for hours to come, but yeah, I just want to thank you for having this chat with me.
No worries. Thanks a lot for the opportunity.